Good evening, everyone. Can I ask you to sit down, be seated, come to your seats? I've lost the power of language. It's the heat. The question is whether you want to, do you want to sit there throughout both the readings, or do you want to come and sit then for the conversation?
I'll just be behind.
Because you'll just be behind them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So shall we be?
I think so.
Yeah.
And then
So
you come
I'll
up,
leave
and then
now, and then we come back when we
and
chat.
then we come back. I think that,
Perfect.
yeah. Welcome everyone to Manchester Poetry Library. Welcome those of you who are here again, and a special welcome to anyone who's here for the first time. My name is Martin Kratz, I'm the Programme Manager. I'm going to hand over to Helen to introduce the event proper, and I'm really here only for housekeeping. But other than housekeeping, the only thing I do want to say is, if you weren't aware of it, we are a public library and you can become a member, and if you have any questions about that, just find me and do ask. The other person I'm going to point out is Sam, who will give a wave now, who's taking photographs. There are signs on the wall, but we're perfectly happy to take you out if you, not take you out of the photographs. Poetry Library is a range of things we offer. So yeah, do just find Sam and he'll do that. Toilets are, as you leave the Poetry Library, on the right. If there's a fire alarm that hasn't been planned, please follow us out to All Saints Park. And we're being live streamed, and I just want to welcome, looking up there, not diagonally into the heavens, but over there to the people joining us online. A special welcome to you. And that's it. I'm now going to hand over to Helen.
Thank you very much, Martin. And wow, thank you all for coming on this beautiful sunny day and for spending the evening here in the library. You've made a good choice. You're in for a treat this evening. This is the last event in this curated by series at Manchester Poetry Library, supported by the Poetry Research Group and the Centre for Place Writing. I know some of you have probably been at the summer school this week as well, so it's also in collaboration with the wonderful summer school. So in this series, I've been interested in writers who in various ways foreground the relationship between the human and the more than human world, how we navigate similarity and difference in complex ecosystems, different political contexts, and how we speak of and to the more than human in an era of climate emergency. So far in the series, if you haven't been to any of the others, we heard from Glyn Maxwell on extinction songs, and more recently from Roy McFarlane on bodies and bodies of water. We've asked questions about giving voice, poetry as response, poetry as activism, and we've met a variety of creatures as well, most importantly, from frogs to herons to the creaturely human being. And I think there may be more creatures tonight, we'll see. But tonight's event is a particularly special one because we've got an exciting double bill. This is a lovely way to end the series with both Isabel Galleymore and Hannah Copley, two writers whose work I personally love and who also refuse easy answers, I think, in their poetry. As well as being in dialogue with me and implicitly with the readings that have come before them, Hannah and Isabelle will be in conversation with each other as well, so that'll be extra nice. Format-wise, they'll each read for about 20 minutes or so, with Isabelle first, and then Hannah. We'll then have a conversation on stage, and then I'll open up the floor. Not open the floor, actually. That would be very apocalyptic, but I'll open up the dialogue for audience questions. So if there's something you'd like to ask, please have a think about that now. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce both of our poets this evening, and I'll introduce them in the order that they're going to read. So first of all, Isabel Galleymor's work speaks directly to the theme of eco-poetry. Her first collection, Significant Other, was published by Carcanet and won the John Pollard Foundation International Poetry Prize in 2020. I think it offered a unique perspective on ideas of species and the creaturely. And then her second collection, Baby Schema, looks, amongst other things, at the idea of cuteness. And I was lucky enough to hear some poems from this a few years ago, I think just before the book came out, possibly, and everybody was talking all night about how brilliant the poems from Baby Schema were. She's also a critic who writes on ecopoetry and a lecturer at Birmingham University. Hannah Copley is the author of Speculum, Broken Sleep, 2021, and Lapwing, Pavilion Poetry, which won second prize in the Laurel Prize in 2024, which is for environmental writing, for those of you who don't know that prize. And it was also shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award. Hannah has also more recently collaborated with Alicia Pir Mohammed on this amazing bit of work called Hurts, which Hannah will say more about, but I think it's certainly the only pamphlet, or kind of, should I call it a pamphlet, a body of poetry that I've ever had which can be planted. So it's a very, very interesting piece of work, and exciting to hear more about that this evening as well. Hannah's subtle and unforgettable extended metaphors make her poems fly. She teaches at the University of Westminster. And yeah, please welcome Hannah, and first to read, Isabel Galleymore. Thank you.
Hi everyone, wow, it's brilliant to be here. It's a real honour and a privilege to be reading with Hannah and in conversation with Helen. And thank you again, I know Helen already said it, but thank you for coming out on this really hot evening. I'm really pleased that there's air conditioning in this building, so thank you for whoever decided that to be here. I'm going to read mainly from this book, which Helen mentioned, Baby Schema, which came out last March. And it's a book full of animals, full of creatures. And I'm going to begin with a really short poem. So this is a poem which isn't too serious. It's a poem which is inspired by an Instagram post that I found whilst writing this book. Morning. I see a person. Hi, I say. Enter their dog. Well, howdy, pal. Oh, petal babe, and aren't you just? And to the person. Hey. Standing behind and ahead, the minute and its siblings. All is possible in the future, I hear, including the future's ending. And when I see the dog, I say, and oh my gosh, does someone want to smooch? And to the person, morning. You don't want to get those two switched around if you're ever greeting your neighbours with dogs in the local park. So yeah, this is a poem, a poetry book full of creatures, and I think what I wanted with this book was there to be a kind of democracy of animals. So it was important for me to think about the real and the wild animals that we live alongside. And there are poems in this book about slugs crossing the garden path and getting in your way. But there are also poems about the animals we find in cute YouTube videos, the adorable otters, the cute kittens, the Instagram posts with cute dogs in them. There are poems about soft toys, which I'm probably going to read in a moment. There are poems about frog-shaped bath sponges that we like squeezing. But for those of you who might have a squeezable or a squishable, or know what one of those is, this poem is for you. You can just imagine a little monkey plushie, and that should see you through. Squeezable. I'd left the house, citing a walk. 6 p.m, a few degrees above freezing. On somebody's dashboard, a soft toy, lilac-furred and smiling. Baby monkey-esque. A breast measure of squishiness. It possessed an explicitly loving gaze I might have judged mildly obscene. But that evening, I needed to find the soft toy benign. The soft toy was eager to love me, and it did so, I felt, comprehensively. In that moment, on the street, a stranger passed between us, and I saw how its moon-eyed look remained, adoring him just as much as me, presumably capable of adoring wholesale. It was so indiscriminate in its loving, I couldn't help feeling angry, disappointed in myself. So Baby Schema, as the title for this book, might need some explanation, maybe not, but it comes from the anthropologist who was working in the mid-1900s called Konrad Lorenz, who came up with this idea of baby schema, or was at least very interested in this set of physical characteristics, which include big eyes and chubby cheeks, and a kind of softness of body and a roundness of body, and often a very tiny nose or a tiny mouth. And these are the kind of characteristics which we would call cute today, but that word didn't really exist then. He was particularly interested in how these characteristics occur in human babies, but also animal babies, so your ducklings and your puppies and your kittens, and how they suggest a kind of vulnerability that in turn pull at our heartstrings and make us care for that cute thing. And once you start looking for baby schema, you see it everywhere, or at least that's what happened with me writing this book. You see it in the gargoyles on cathedrals, you see it in a potato, really bizarre places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Baby schema. I like the word mother only because I'm still a child, or want to be, the one cared for, no debt, nothing on file. To shrug off adulthood the way the statue on the street has let his stone head wear away to a chubby-cheeked, big-eyed roundedness that stares, bemused, perhaps concerned. How I stare when I see the child next door who drags a watering can between wilting shrubs like a child and not at all. I've been interested in the last few years about how we categorize animals and how we kind of describe ourselves as either humans outside of the animal world or as part of that animal world. And I started thinking about the ways in which we categorize. So we think about mammals, we think about reptiles, we think about invertebrates, how they got their names. And I kind of went on one of those nerdy etymology kind of discoveries with mammal, and thinking about how if we trace it back, we get to mama and the idea of motherhood, and then to the Latin mama meaning teat or breast. And this idea of kind of creating a group of animals that breastfeed is actually quite a strange thing to do. And also perhaps by thinking about mammals, because we are mammals, we tend to privilege other mammals and perhaps overlook those species which are so distant from the human form, when in fact they're doing a lot of good work in the world. Mammal Club. When I find a lump like a marble, a choking hazard in one of my body's sippy cups, yes, those parts of myself permitting me entrance to the Mammal Club, I'm reminded that special rank exists for animals who breastfeed their young, that this is a fact, like I breathe every other breath because of plankton. Plankton, which is too small for the human eye to perceive, has breath-fed me since my conception. It's nothing, the specialist tells me. This requires no further attention, and I breathe another breath because of plankton. Plankton too small for the human to believe could be a mama. Heritage. Like a glossy nativity scene, the barrels of pansies, the swept platform, the canopy's preserved supports, being repainted by a man in vintage overalls, and we are talking about where to go for dinner when in it comes, smoking like a cartoon baddie. But we are also talking about the days ahead, your job, and the station master checks the time twice, and you should leave the company, and where could we live? Tickets punched, fields open before us, tired from the outstanding summer again. We are talking about the mortgage and what we can set aside, while the choo-choo scatters some birds, which from here look vintage too, small, so pretty, and children. What could we offer them? had a request from a friend to read a poem about a cat. And it's right here on the page, so I'm not going to forget it. This is called Good Natured. You felt hungry, unlooked after of late. You've walked, uncertain where to go, and now you sit on this front step in first light, where a rosebush self-congratulates, and a sign, lost cat, sticks in the window. You felt hungry, unlooked after of late, and the cat is your stock cat, tabby striped, though these days probably a bit uncombed. Sitting on this front step in first light, as starlings glitch above, you might wonder if the cat's name is actually your own. You felt so hungry, unlooked after of late, you wait on this front step in first light. Because we knew we had to wait until we found a good reason to have one. We'd heard about the farmer couple who sought to expand into peas and beans, and so had one, and later another, as did the family soap manufacturer that required more hands to release the soaps from their casts, which gave the impression the soaps were made with loving care to meet growing demand. Understanding children to be the future who would go on to fix several of the world's most pressing problems, some people, including our neighbours, had one. It lay like a sandbag in its mother's arms. Occasionally I'd sigh, I just want one. We need a good reason, you'd reply without hesitation. Like this, quietly, a few years came and went. Then, one spring, in which every dawn came piglety, and the blossom trees were really putting in the work, I dropped an earring into the gap of the living room floorboards that only a small hand could retrieve, and I gave you the look, and you carried me up the stairs. Okay, so I'm someone who, if we have a conversation later, and I hope we do, it'd be nice to meet some of you. I'm somebody who uses the word wow a lot. So if we are in conversation, even if it's just 30 seconds, I'll probably use it at least 7 times. It's kind of a problem, but I'm deciding to lean in to wow. And if my partner was here, he would attest to all of this, because when we're out on a hike or a long walk of some kind, I slow him down so much by being like, wow, what is this caterpillar, or whatever it might be. I've since learned that this style of walking is actually called land snorkeling. So again, I'm being told to lean into this way of being in the world. So this is my poem full of wows. I haven't counted them. If you'd like to count them, we could kind of do a bingo type thing, but probably no need to shout out bingo. On earth. Wow, the nature living here. The plant that, wow, blooms in circles. And wow, the shadows of each petal. Wow, the gnattor never minded. Wow, the newt stare in amongst the complex noun share living here. Nowhere. Wow, the nose hair, wild, abundant gnomeware living here. Wow, the beetroot's ratty tail, terry towel-like lichen, also wow. Shh, I say, these wows too much. But what on earth am I to do beneath this sky dolloped with cloud? Every breath is made of wow. And I'm just going to finish on a few poems from a kind of sequence that sits at the core of Baby Schema. I'm a poet who really loves to kind of get out into the world and do my research projects in order to write about the things that I'm interested in. And I'm sure that's going to spur lots of conversation. I think Hannah's similar. And in the past, I've kind of gone off to the rainforest and had an amazing residency in the Peruvian rainforest to write a pamphlet of work about that. But for this book, I needed something a little bit different. So I took myself off to Disneyland Paris for 2 weeks. On my own, not 2 weeks, 2 days. My gosh, not 2 weeks. That would be a long research project, and the outcome would be very different. 2 days on my own on my birthday. And I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read a little excerpt so you can get a flavour of it. Disneyland. Making eye contact with a squirrel for a second or 3 too long, I find myself still waiting for nature to wave back. Here, you can really get up close. A chipmunk knees a toddler over. It's a delicatessen of animism, and its shopkeeper is a mouse. He flings out his arms in welcome. Michael, whistling dreamster. Michael Mouse, minstrel gloved 4-fingered. No nursery of mites in your fur. Here. Air is textured with glockenspiel and popcorn. Not a leaf is out of place. One boy uttery with mommy, anticipating his 12 p.m. meet and greet with a lion. That they're capable of love, no one can be certain. Mothers in this particular landscape are, by tradition, evil or absent. And with my absent child, I sit in the shade of a castle, built in, kind of, decorated in, quite. Close by, a sparrow, very small, behaves as if this place is real. It's not, and knocks her beak against, I watch, a Thai green curry crisp on the cobbled floor. Several feathers are like a wave washed up, untidily white on her side. Her flaxseed eye, unblinking, aloof. And all the time I notice this, a fly rests on my breast, like my breast's a piece of fruit in a 17th century Dutch still life. Alongside pops of Wild West gunshots, a blown kiss from a princess floats above a duck who's nude below the waist. The kiss drifts up and over Edison Avenue, Rococo scroll, Cheshire cat and caterpillar, the labyrinth grown from you in which the dodo's lost. Dressed in a damson overcoat, he's saying, which way, pipe in hand, he'll be lost forever, but extraordinarily good-humoured. And where, with all these boundaries crossed, am I, adjusting, and also my ponytail, who? Billy Bob's mac and cheese, Arabian treasure, piles of looking salty. What is she doing with a notebook open? Am I something funny? Not wearing you, your ears omnipresent, always unhearing, you, Michael of the wrist tattoo, Michael of the waffle, Michael of the band-aid pressed against a blistered ankle. Thank you, I'll leave it there, and I hand over to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Izzy. That was amazing. I love that poem. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. We were just saying before we started that there's a lovely bunch. We're all similar height, which is quite rare. I find at readings personally, so it's very nice to not have too much of an adjustment each time. But yeah, thank you very much for having me here tonight, and thank you to Isabel and to Helen and to all of you. And yeah, there were some lovely birds featured there in Izzy's poems, and I'm going to pick up on that and do some more bird talking today. And I'm going to read mostly from this book, Lapwing, and then kind of end on this little compostable thing here, Hurts. So yeah, bear with me, and I'll try and do my best to not talk too much and over-explain myself. I sometimes do that. I'll stop. But just kind of like nod to the side if you just want me to get on with it. See, like I'm doing now. I'm going to stop now. So Lapwing is a biography of a bird, of a lapwing. It's a biography of the word itself and a kind of deep dive into the history of it. And it's also a kind of sideways and faltering and jagged and probably unsuccessful attempt to think about addiction and love and the ways that it can be very hard to pin down in order to love someone and something struggling and kind of in the midst of their own destruction. It's made up of a number of different voices, and it's kind of one long big sequence. So I always feel that slight anxiety of having to explain myself into it a little bit. There's Lapwing, who is this mercurial, flitting, very charming migratory bird who is here, there, and everywhere, and he's also struggling and fading. And then there's Pete, the much more grounded daughter trying to make sense of this disappearing father. Then there are a number of amateur ornithologists that kind of crop up all the way through and have sightings of lapwing, and generally involve killing lapwings in order to sight them. And then finally there are lapwing birds that sort of flitter and punctuate the book in wordless flight all the way through. So punctuation sort of represents bird flight. And the first poems I'm going to start with are the first poems in the book, and they introduce us to Lapwing and Pete. Description. Last seen in his winter plumage, black and white from a safe distance, metallic olive at close range. Undertail coverts rufous, cinnamon-tinged, thin legs of bright red flesh, almost raw-looking. Often mistaken for hoopoe, which riles him. Black pectoral band, white flank, with a dark ring of colour beneath each eye, the thickness of paint. Longest feather of his crest once boasted at 4 inches. Wings an iridescent green, seen only when flying away. Will go by peewit, plover, chewit, lapwinker, peet, 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 toppy, kievit, lapwinker, pater, vanillus, Philippine. Is that all? Just that everything he says sounds like a question. Is that all? And she remembers his stories. Lapwing, quenched, slowly tumbling from high singularity into the scrape of his thoughts. Thirst and craving grounded into a fuzzed eloquence. Panicked peas weep, softening into prose. Here is something to feather. This pulls skywards towards a coded vagary. The willingness to come down from a high place tied to a sliding scale of need. Each morning, the same boorish dogs, the same dull threat of obliteration. Her granted wildness cordoned into a neat rectangle. She is done with this wintering, ready for the earth to give, poised to scratch for a more tender language. So, the reason that I started writing about lapwings is I was on maternity leave and I was walking out with my daughter in the carrier, and we were walking the fields and we were taking up time in the way that you do when you're needing to take up units of time with a small child just in order to get from one kind of hour to the next. And so I had her in my carrier and I was there bobbing around the field, and I kind of looked out over this field. I've walked hundreds of times and hadn't noticed this before, but my bobbing suddenly I noticed was echoed by a bird bobbing around as if it was on like a kind of trampoline. And so I was there bobbing and this bird was there bobbing, and something just sort of clicked and I had to know more about lapwings. Does everyone know what a lapwing is? It's fine if you don't, this is a safe space. Lapwings are lovely wader birds and they're beautiful, and they kind of hop up and down when they're distressed or when they're kind of under threat or just kind of having a little dance. So they look like they're on trampolines. So I went home and I started to look into lapwings, and they are amazing. And the more I kind of learned about them, the more I realized that they have this fantastic history in our literature as well. So we have hundreds of regional names for a lapwing. Depending on where you live, you will have a different name for a lapwing all around the world. And they appear in Chaucer, in Shakespeare, in John Gower, in James Joyce, in Wuthering Heights. They're the lapwing feathers in the pillow. But often, time and time again, lapwings they're used as a sort of a conceit or an analogy for dirtiness and deceitfulness and cowardly behaviour. So Shakespeare says that Polonius is a lapwing and he runs away with the egg on his head. And Chaucer talks about, or Gower talks about lapwings as this like cowardly, dirty man. So basically to call someone a lapwing was an insult. And I was just really fascinated by this history and the way that they crop up everywhere. And also we used to collect lapwing eggs. So the Easter bunny is probably from lapwings, where they nested on the ground, and then hares would kind of sit around the eggs, and people would think they were taking rabbit hare eggs, but actually they were lapwing eggs. So they're sort of everywhere, and we like to kill them. And it just sort of then nested in my head, and I kept going. So this sequence started, and it goes all the way through the book, of this lapwing, and they're otherwise known as lapwing. And I'm just going to read a few poems from the sequence. 1. Otherwise known as peewit, otherwise known as chewit, otherwise known as vanillus of the family cherry, otherwise known as plain old lappy nestling itself in the till, otherwise known as diver found in its down in the centre of some middle of nowhere, otherwise known as wailer, otherwise known as waverer, as imp, liar, as shrill green sky, as wader of the marsh, slope, as flock, as Tiresias turned and heckling the cows, otherwise known as crown prince, as crest, as sharp throat, as hair, otherwise known as zigzag, soaring, dizzy, otherwise known as lost, otherwise known as green plover, controller of seasons, shaman, crook, some skittish soul turning everything it doesn't understand into a god, god of the long grass, god of the cuckoo bird, god of the gloved hand, god of the drought, god of the estate, god of the sloping roof, god of the silver tree, god of the frost, god of the harvest, god of the metal raw, god of the spinning white, god of the crop, god of the unhatched, god of the death machine. Otherwise known as nickname, posture, as totter, raked ground, lapwing, some sly, false flex, otherwise felt as a leap, as a tombstone shiver, as an ever-constant wince. Otherwise known as peat, plumage primped and plucked to perfection, each bright tail up, rake, breast down, peck, crown, otherwise known as hollow man, as bust up, wing smacking the green fool that even thinks to try his luck in these parts. Territory as self-expression, otherwise known as belonging, peat. Otherwise known as showman, as feathers, all dives and rolls and tumbles in time to his swing song, swan song, his own peas weep, otherwise known as seduction. Now, this dance that they do became so fascinating to me. The idea that you will make this big kind of display, and you will put everything out there, and you'll make lots of noise, and you'll jump around, and all the while the thing that makes you vulnerable is just over there to the side. And it's a trait of the lapwing, but it feels to me like a very human trait as well. And certainly that choreography of survival and of just kind of getting by really took hold. I can find my page. 5. Birds have their demons too, otherwise heard as diversions. From the Latin to draw or drag apart, peewit has his way of flitting, of feigning each intended cry. Drink, violence, no sense of direction, reneging on a promise to mate for life, insolence, otherwise known as a deceit. For every short, sharp peat, there are 10 chewits that never catch the wind. Here's one with a temper under his wing. Come cat, he shrieks. Come fox. Come man with his sharp tang and featherless glove. Come cuckoo. Come endless sound. Come parch. Come hunger. Come pluck. Come blunt serrated edge. Come raging monster blocking out the clouds. I think one of the reasons that dance took hold is I, as many people do and have, and what's been lovely about this book is taking it around and chatting to people about this, is my father struggled with addiction his whole life, and my whole life. I didn't know him without him being addicted to one thing or another, and passed away of his addictions when I was 21. And for a while before that, I was a carer for him, and we were estranged, and it was a very difficult relationship. And that dance and the way that you flit and you you kind of deceive those around you, and that actually lying gets this terrible reputation, but actually it's a survival mechanism. And I didn't really realize that as a kid, because I think your parents aren't people when you're a kid. They're creatures, and they're kind of half god, half monster. And I think it's only when you become a grown-up yourself and you become very human and very kind of faulty all the time that maybe I started to see him differently. But I thought, because he passed away before he became human, why not keep him as a bird, I guess, is what I was thinking about. And so, yeah, this collection is also thinking about trying to take hold of someone and trying to love them and accept deceit and accept dissemblance as just a way of being, and that sometimes you just can't help it. One second. I wrote my page numbers at the start and then I lost my page numbers. Here we go. 11, sorry. On the difficulty of care. They once found him lulled beneath the concrete base of the pylon, raggedy feather rucked in leaf mold and mess, smell of abandoned nest caught in the grass, green feather almost a pure dull, Pete leaning in close enough to hear his heart's violent thrum against the steady gust of each commuter. Lapwing, otherwise known as Chewit, remains where he tucks, body ringed by the offerings of his brood, proffered cranefly, larvae, a dozen wetland mollusks rotting into a single organism, slug bloated and floating backwards in the waterlogged rut. Indifference, otherwise justified as the quick nipping of pain in the bud, pulls her to a safe distance. Let the pylon loom, she thinks. Let him kite himself across this metal nation. Let the A-road keep us forever severed. Let him fashion his own flight home, a safe acreage between them. Let him disintegrate. Love held in leagues, love wrapped in steel and power cables, love in concrete wings. On waking. Hawk hovers and falls from the firmament. Pete, roosting in dawn frost, thinks of mornings spent enveloped in the cotton womb of her grandparents' bed. Grief, she thinks, is just an inflammation of memory, a fine tendon slowly ripping itself from wingtip to beak. So it's quite a depressing book, but I've been thinking recently about neat edges and progress, and people keep asking me at the end, like, has this been a cathartic and therapeutic experience? I'm like, no, I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me whether it is or not. I don't know. It's fine that it's still messy, and the book has an appendix at the end, and it's sort of, Lapwing's still there. The figure is still there. This doesn't feel like I've sort of reconciled anything, but it felt important to write it all the same. But equally, I kind of find a sort of grim happiness and joy in unfinished business, in that I think in terms of environmental poetry, neat hedgerows are a very artificial thing, and we kind of come up with these borders for our work and then we finish it and we're done. You're like, oh, okay, I took on that big thing and then I'm done. But actually, when we're thinking about the environment, it's a very messy thing. And actually, when we're talking about rewilding, I like the idea of sort of rewilding grief and rewilding a collection, in that you don't have to end when you end. You can keep going. And so there's a joy in that refusal to accept any progress in this book. It doesn't have a beginning and a middle and an end. It's sort of ongoing. But that in itself feels quite positive to me. But there is some moments where some people have said to me it's slightly less depressing. So that's good. I'll take that from them. And this poem is, in a way, kind of leading into the work that takes place in Hertz. And I'm going to make sure, because this is also a book about lapwings. They're an amazing species, and they're an endangered species. And where I am, there were lapwings when I spotted them, but they're not there anymore. And I have to come to Northumberland and up here to spot lapwings as much, and that makes me sad. And so I think sometimes it's really useful to go lower and lower and lower as we're writing, and ground and ground and ground, and borrow and borrow and borrow. And so I like trying to kind of see things from a different viewpoint and a different angle, in which Pete repeats the lessons that Lapwing taught her. That a field is only a defined shape from above. That the neatness of a field on a piece of paper is a kind of shibboleth. We are both wrong, it says. We have never lived in this field. That a child will always draw a square field. That a field appears smooth to a drone or a balloon or an aeroplane or a paraglider or a sky lantern drifting slowly downwards. That a sky lantern drifting slowly downwards towards the field portends death. That a field is a series of jagged edges. That a wheat field can be drawn as a racing heartbeat. That a wheat field can be drawn as a disused needle factory. That a wheat field can be drawn as a hoard of spent arrows. That a wheat field can be drawn as the sky's scrubbing brush. That each rutted valley is called a ginnel. That a field is part wrapper, part coin, part buried screw, part crudely painted stone. That a field is only flat when seen from the sky. That a field roots itself deeper than it is ever able to rise. Now, I'm going to end with a couple of things about this. So this, in a way, came about from Lapwing. I met Alicia Pir Mohammed at the Laurel Prize, and Alicia is a fantastic poet and a fantastic eco-poet as well. And we got chatting, and then we got this lovely commission to work together for Dirt Compostable Poetry, which are a wonderful organisation that do carbon positive publishing and are kind of trying to change the industry and think about different ways of bringing out work. And what they do is they partner you up for a month, and they set you a particular piece of scientific research, and then you go off and you write about it, and you produce this lovely thing, and they're all going to look different depending on who does it. And then we kind of send them off into the world, and then when you're done with it, you can just rip it up, and it comes with seeds that have been harvested by the editor, and you just plant it in the soil, and it will grow into wildflowers. And I think that's totally lovely. So I'm letting go of the ego and stuff, but our background and our kind of practice, we were set the commission to think about the sound of restored soil and the fact that healthy soil sounds different to unhealthy soil. And diverse soil, if you measure it using kind of very precise equipment, and you hear the earthworms and you can hear the different kind of diversity of life, it makes a very different sort of sonic sound to soil that has been over-processed, basically. And so that maybe listening to soil might be a new way of gathering research about ecosystems and about soil life and kind of generally listening in different ways and the activities of earthworms. So obviously that's a sort of lovely thing to begin with. And so, yeah, we wrote together, and I don't know whether anyone's ever worked collaboratively with someone else before, but you sort of fall in love when you're doing it as well. You get so involved in the process, and you kind of fall in love with the work, and you send each other everything all the time, and it just became this incredible experience. And so, yeah, I'm just going to read a couple of bits from it. Hypothesis. 1. That soil, sound it out, is only one chamber. 2. That to speak of soil, roll it over, is to mislabel a shovel as a sieve. 2a, when we say soil, we sound soil, but we sign cup or stone or floor or skin or nursery or lung or grave or pool or rot, but we can't say it because we don't eat a thing by entering it, see fungi, but by putting it into our mouths and destroying it from the outside in. 3, that to want to listen is to long to disperse. 3a, take a poem, enter it, and slough off each word like a slow worm sloughs off its skin, like a grass snake sloughs, like an oak tree sloughs, is to begin to mingle. 4, when we cry out, it might sound like soil, but it's not soil. 5, it's simply exclaiming. 6, it's simply adding to a sound. Thank you very much.
I'm going to steal your response, Isabel. Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you. My head is teeming with ideas and responses after that. I'm thinking about the sonics of the ground and books as wildflowers. I was thinking about your precise, acute images, Isabel, and the amazing like trick of making us see like breasts as sippy cups, nature's sippy cups. Is wonderful. I was wondering about what we want from these cute creatures, and the videos of otters, and then knowing that otters are actually like little psychopaths of the animal kingdom. And then I was thinking about those moments when a poem starts and the sighting of the bird, and how you said, Hannah, that it nested in my head, and the image of a wheat field as the sky's scrubbing brush. And then I was thinking, how do you even begin to put all those different impressions and that richness of the readings into some questions? So I thought I'll just start with the really difficult ones. Let's just dive in with some really hard questions. So I've got a question about research, but I feel like that's not the hardest question to start with. So let's go for the big question first of all. And that's the idea of projects and completion that you were speaking about, Hannah. I found that really fascinating. And I guess it's made me think, especially in terms of what we might term eco-poetry. If poetry doesn't solve things, what does it do? Is it that rewilding is the ultimate aim, or is it something else? Sorry, I said that was going to be a big question, but I don't know who wants to start.
Wow.
Dive in.
Oh, I feel like I have to, just because I was the one that raised it. Not that I have any necessarily profound thing to say about it. I don't know. I don't think that it's our job to solve anything, because I think that falls into the same category that we are somehow the saviour, and as well as the destroyer. And so actually I'm quite happy to nestle and mingle and burrow in amongst it and kind of unsave myself or take myself back into it a little bit. But whether I think I can do anything, I do think poetry and all art raises awareness, but often we're preaching to the choir anyway and to a particular audience. But the editor of this, Alice Willits, she does believe in utopian poetics and through utopian poetics, and she's just started up a new magazine, and I think it sounds kind of amazing thinking about that in relation to catastrophic poetics. And I just love that we can have so many different poetics in relation to how we feel about the environment. So that's not an answer at all, but it's more just that I think messiness is a good thing, because whenever we try and neaten anything, usually we destroy it anyway. Maybe.
That is a very good answer. It's not just an answer, it's a profound one. Thank you. How about you?
I'm wondering how to follow that, actually. It's really interesting that I think when I was an undergraduate student, I was totally transformed. My idea of poetry was transformed by reading poets like John Clare, these amazing bird poems. Presumably has poems about lapwings, I think, probably, I don't know. But his really close attention to the environment, I think, totally changed my thinking about the environment and made me feel a lot more alert to the issues, and eventually led to me writing the poems that I do today. So in that sense, I totally agree. I think poetry, eco-poetry, can be a kind of consciousness-raising activity. And then the other side of myself is this massive cynic who's like, well, why should poetry save the world, even if it could do so? So I kind of have this very uneven view of what poetry can do, or what it should do, if it should do anything. But more and more with the writing, I think especially in the first collection, which was a lot more focused on sea creatures, especially those kind of overlooked limpets and barnacles that we might not generally write poems about, I was kind of really interested in attention as a form of environmental activism, and the idea that perhaps even observation can be a way of stopping and kind of checking ourselves and checking the world around us. And I feel that comes into your poems, actually, in terms of the lapwing and the attention that you're giving that lapwing. There's a moment of actually stopping. So yeah, kind of observation as a form of activism.
I want to change my answer to that. That was really attention as a form of activism is lovely. Yeah.
And that idea of attention and calling attention to things and kind of honouring things with your attention makes me think about the word fieldwork, which I love. And I was thinking about the Lapwing, Hannah, and that is fieldwork in action in a way, in a field, the truest fieldwork. But yeah, and kind of what that means. You've both spoken a little bit about research and what research means within your writing practice, whether it's going to Disneyland Paris or those kind of, you know, a moment of seeing something and then going back and researching it. I'm always really curious about how we research as creative writers, and sort of when you know you've got enough, or when you've got too, like I often struggle with, if I'm looking at something historical, for example, kind of having too much interesting stuff. It's almost sometimes too good to make a poem out of. I can't add anything to it. So what, I guess my question is, if there is a question in there, what's your individual relationship with research like as you craft your books and your poems?
Shall I go first? Yeah, so I think for me it's very much about close observation, even if it's a soft toy. I kind of want to be out in the field in toy shops or Disneyland, or I've been recently playing cozy farming games to also kind of increase my sense of artifice and how the environment is being portrayed. So for me it's kind of always about lots of note-taking, but also people watching. And that was the delight about Disneyland, was not only feeling myself watched and judged as this single person, single adult wandering around, and enjoying the rides. I have to say I did enjoy myself a little bit. But also, yeah, watching how people were interacting and what these huge animal mascots kind of bumbling around were doing. And in terms of that question, Helen, that you asked about like quantity, that was something that really came up in the Disneyland sequence, because I kind of came back with a whole notebook full of stuff. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. So I'd actually caught COVID on the way home on the Eurostar. So I'd had this really bizarre experience, had a bit of a fever trying to look at all this work that I'd kind of accumulated. And in the end, a really useful constraint for me, I think, with that research project was syllables. So I ended up writing each page of the Disneyland sequence is actually 100 syllables, because it was 100 years of Walt Disney when I was at Disneyland. So there was a way of kind of, I guess, managing the material through that constraint, and also managing the kind of excess of Disneyland and its just maximalism into something a little bit more economic and constrained.
I really love the syllable count in that. It's so beautiful, and then the kind of rhythms that it creates as well. It's so lovely. I started my life, my career in like the other side of writing, so literature and in archives, and so I really always gravitate towards archival research first. So I was over at the University of Leeds in the special collections over there, and so really I always just kind of go towards other people's voices and archival voices first. I find that easier as a way into myself, I think, through researching other things, definitely etymology. And for Lapwing, it was a very felt experience, like I heard it, and it was very much about walking and being out and field work, in terms of just walking the same fields over and over again and writing as I was walking and trying to get the rhythm of the bird in time with the kind of movement, so that was happening. But at the same time, for the sightings, I was reading old copies of the Auk magazine, which is like the kind of bird watching from the 19th century, and also going through newspaper cuttings from like the 18th century and 19th century about whenever they featured lapwings. So usually like poor boys arrested for stealing lapwing eggs and stuff like that. And so just kind of taking cuttings from that material and putting that in, and I really love that stuff, and it's informed both of my books a lot. But now I'm trying to kind of think a little bit differently about this idea of the archive when we're thinking about soil, and when we're thinking about being outside, and what an archive means when it's a tree and a piece of soil that also holds its own history and you can kind of access it. But it raises all sorts of questions about what it means to kind of do organic archival research, and that really I have to sort of change the way that I approach it as a researcher as well. So I've been trying out lots of things that are quite new to me in terms of like somatic exercises, and so burying my feet and seeing how that feels and writing in as much detail as I can, and kind of stuff that's trying to get my body involved a little bit, because I think I've always felt like I can take refuge in research, but actually maybe refuge isn't the right thing when you're working, and it's actually immersion and embodiment. So I'm giving that kind of research a go at the moment.
Thank you both. I think I always thinking about that research and kind of obsession with, or anyway, my obsession with the poems that don't get written, or the kind of the poem you're not quite writing that exists in parallel somewhere, or the poem you thought you'd write when you approach the topic. I always find them really interesting. And it seems to me as if poetry is a kind of nicely zero waste enterprise, even imaginatively, because rather than there being a kind of landfill where all the research and the ideas go that don't directly inform the collection, everything sort of has its role, even if it's not directly mentioned, and it kind of pollinates and it goes into, or it becomes something else later, and they have this interesting life. Anyway, that's a overextension of the landfill recyclable metaphor. You mentioned John Clare, Isabel, and we again talking about the idea of influence and also working with other collaborators, like your collaborative project, Hannah. I just wondered if I could ask you that predictable question about influence and kind of what excites you from the past and the present in your writing, but perhaps with a slightly ecological slant somehow.
That's that thing, you know, when someone asks you what your favourite song is and you suddenly can't remember ever listening to music or anything like that. So one big influence for the form of this book was Geoffrey Hill's Mercy and Hymns. Big fan of Geoffrey Hill, and the idea of these kind of contained little treasures I love, and Basil Bunting, and so some of the sort of long sequences, even John Berryman. I do love a sequence, Alice Notley's The Descent of Eliot. I think the way that a poem can unfold itself slowly is just amazing. So they were definitely older influences. But I also really love Banu Kapil's work. And Juliana Spaha's work just is so exciting. And the way that she makes her process and her form part of the kind of ecological process as well, I think is really great. And I love Jason's Othello, and I think like the way again that he kind of manages a character and sustains this portrait and this self-portrait over a long time, I think is incredibly exciting. So definitely the self-portrait as Othello was hugely important, and I really love Hannah Sullivan's work. I think Malika Booker's work, she's another kind of amazing master of a good sequence too. So there's a lot of different influences, but definitely at the moment I was talking to Helen just before about Juliana Spaha and also Mary Ruffle, and thinking about how they write about landfill and oil and waste and dumps, and I just find really interesting at the moment.
I'd totally second the Juliana Spaha recommendation. Huge fan. Really love the way that she does that kind of global, personal juxtaposition. So for me, that really, I don't know, there's something about our current era that we're living in with the kind of hyper object that's climate change that's so hard to perceive, and in other places very easy to perceive because it has such physical consequences for many of us. And she kind of does this amazing thing of bringing the personal up against that kind of global happening. So yeah, I would say she's a big influence of mine, and actually that kind of links to something I might want to ask you later about repetition, because there's some really lovely repetition in your work. I guess in terms of influences, it's kind of changed over the years. Like I've had some really fantastic collaborations with the Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and this residency I had in the Amazon was really informative and such an honour to kind of be in this amazing area of biodiversity and to be working alongside scientists who were focused on macaws and other species in the Amazon. And so definitely science has always been a kind of source for me, even though I'm absolutely not a trained scientist. There's something about the language that often really appeals when it's not a familiar word, when it's often metaphorical actually, or just kind of brings in a different sound into a poem. So kind of trying to make sense of, say, limpet anatomy has been something that I've really enjoyed in the past, as geeky as that sounds. And then with this book, I think I was really inspired by cute studies, which is a field. It's its own scholarly field, believe it or not, and really multidisciplinary. So kind of thinking around how cuteness affects our psychology, as well as kind of our business strategies. And I noticed even on this bottle of water, it says, "I am attached to recycle together," with a little lid. So the fact that, you know, the bottle of water has a sense of I and a personal perspective. So I kind of feel like I'm very influenced by not only the kind of scholarly side of thinking around how cuteness mediates our world in terms of what we commodify and what we care about, but also just the kind of everyday objects, which is probably a very obvious thing to say, given I read some poems about soft toys.
Can I pick up on a thing? When you were saying about the kind of global and the local and the personal, because I think that you do that incredibly well in this book. And one poem that really struck me was when you're talking about dolls, and then suddenly there's this moment at the end of the poem where you go, of course, we never chuck anything away. This doll will live forever. And it was this incredibly jarring, like, kind of twist in the poem. But I was wondering, were you consciously trying to think about, do you ever consciously think, I'm going to try and be global and local and personal? Can we ever do that as writers, or does it fail immediately when we try and do it? Or was it a kind of, oh, I did that? Sort of
I think it's always a surprise. Like, I think the best poems or the best kind of poetry experience being a poet is when you're surprised by something. But then I often think it comes through metaphor. So I might be writing about one individual thing, and I just writing down some adjectives, and then suddenly this metaphor comes along that kind of opens the scale up in a way that I hadn't anticipated. So I think it often comes through that. Can I ask you about repetition? Just kind of jumping in there with that question about kind of what it means to you, or how, because it feels really incantatory in the poem. It feels like it kind of drives the poem, like there's an engine there.
It definitely became a sort of, an engine that didn't stop as well. But another influence for me is music, and jazz music, and the idea of a riff and going again and again and again, but sort of doing it differently each time, and the idea that it's a sort of refrain or a song, definitely. But so that really drove it, and finding the rhythm. But I definitely find repetition this hugely inspiring thing. So for me, poems, it's almost like a joke or a long extended comedy show of, like, it starts okay, it starts good, and then it has to go through this bit when you keep repeating, and it's like, ugh, and then it keeps going and pushing and pushing and pushing, and it pushes so much that it becomes really good again. It's like a Stuart Lee set, you know, like where, and that's what repetition does for me. And I kind of love that. I see how far can you push the same word, and how far can you push the same phrase. And I find it very creative to keep pushing and pushing and pushing at the adjectives and the language, and just to kind of go, like, who's going to break first, like me or the words? Like, so yeah.
I love that analogy of the repetition being like a Stuart Lee set. It's exactly that. It's kind of, I often think of it with poetry as like taking a thought, or in this case, like to its illogical conclusion, and like what happens when you do that. This has been wonderful. You're both so eloquent about all of these subjects. I am going to hand over to audience questions in a second, but have a last question, if that's okay, which is about the idea of poetry and science. And we're all very interested, obviously, in working in interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary ways, particularly science, arts. I know we've all kind of probably got in our work that in some way. And when I work with scientists, I feel like we often talk a lot about what can poetry bring to the science, and how can it help with maybe communicating, disseminating findings, framing things differently. But in the kind of bigger dialogue, how can science respond to poetry? Do we think? If this is a question that I wonder about, so I'm lazily just asking you to provide the answers, because you're both so wise.
But you actually write really well about this, because you've written a piece that really struck me and that's really stayed with me about the whole idea that poetry shouldn't be like the cherry on top of the cake. Isn't that right? Like that often poets are brought in, or artists are brought in at the end of a project to, like, and now prepare a piece, and it is meaningless to the science, and so immediately it's going to have no kind of purpose apart from a decorative one. And so you've raised these points so well in your writing, and you're kind of doing it and thinking about how can you be there from the start. But actually I think metaphor and metaphorical language, and the fact that science is metaphor too, and tools and thinking about tools and breaking them apart through like messing with the language and kind of going, well, what does that extractor do? Like, can you talk me through the instruction manual for this? Oh, that's a really interesting word. But almost rereading metaphors and the language that we take for granted, and then kind of making us look sideways at the world, you know, the whole tell all the truth but tell it slant thing. I think that poetry has a really dynamic way of close attention and of hypothesizing and of the idea, again, thinking of refrains, you know, science is never finished and poetry can keep going on and it's a sequence. And so actually poetic form is a kind of scientific process of sequencing.
That's a really beautiful answer. I guess I've engaged with this in a sense via a PhD that I did was kind of looking at how nature writing is being taught at universities. So how students kind of might come onto courses hoping to write about the environment or to write eco-poetry. And I was really interested in how people were being instructed to do that. And what I found consistently across courses in the UK and in the US was that there was this emphasis on science where you're meant to read the field guide and you're meant to kind of have a solid understanding of eco-literacy, so you can point out what a blackbird is and what a robin is and what a lapwing is. And as much as I think that's valuable, that kind of semi-scientific way of knowing the world, I also think that we can do that as poets ourselves. We might be able to find our own field guides, and I actually found Lapwing, you know, something of a field guide in there where we are able to identify the bird through the language you're creating rather than, you know, a slightly more kind of stripped back field guide, I suppose. And so I've always been a great advocate of coming up with our own names for things. I mean, I think it's great if we can, you know, make discernments in the environment around us and the creatures we're seeing. But I think if we can actually use our words ourselves, that kind of brings a little bit more of a personal naming to the world around us. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but there's something there that I guess is semi-resistant of even perhaps engaging with science to some degree.
This is my dream conversation. Thank you both. This could carry on and on and on. But I'm going to see if anyone else would like to ask a question. Please do, or I'll invent another laboured landfill-related metaphor. So yeah, if anyone would like, we don't have a roving microphone, unfortunately. But if you speak your question at a fairly audible volume, I can repeat it for the live stream. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, just to repeat that for the live stream, even though I think we all heard it. Why do lapwings have so many different names, Hannah?
I don't know. Like, that's such a good question. But that kind of goes back to what Izzy was saying there about that we can't help ourselves. We have to name and personalise and kind of have a local identity for our birds. They're so close to us, aren't they? And I think birds, there's a reason like birds come up again and again in poetry, and that there are kind of doubles or our way of measuring the world around us, and so we can't help but personalize and naming in order to own, but also in order to love. But I don't know why lapwings in particular have this incredible kind of folklore. It's fascinating, and there are so many, and wherever I go, people are like, you missed out one. And so I've missed out a couple of Welsh names apparently, and then I was kind of working with a Dutch poet, and she was telling me that I'd kind of missed out some Dutch lapwing names, and it's just fascinating. It's really, it'd be lovely to have a full list of lapwing names. I've made a few up as well, but yeah. Maybe you know. Does anyone know? Maybe there might be a proper answer to that rather than a Hannah answer there.
I think there's something really nice when you're working on a subject, either while you're working on it or afterwards, of getting all this fascinating information from the people that you encounter. I'm trying to write non-fiction about herons at the moment, and I had this lovely week a while ago where it felt like every day that week, at least once a day, sometimes multiple times a day, somebody from around the world was sending me a photograph of a heron that they'd seen or a bit of heron trivia. And I was like, even if I never write the book, this has been a glorious experience. And then after you continue to find out, which kind of goes back to your idea of, how poetry doesn't solve things, but continues to rewild. Yeah. Yes.
I was just thinking about that in terms of community and how important community is to to writing, and how it's not just, you know, a kind of nature writer going out or an eco-poet going out into the field, and it's definitely not a singular endeavour. And that was what's so brilliant about finding out so many words about lapwings. And I think also it makes me think about Robert Macfarlane's book, Landmarks, which has this amazing glossary of everything in the environment, depending on dialect. I cannot think of a single example, but, you know, there's a kind of glossary for peat, you know, so you've got all these different kind of words that might come regionally for peat. And it's just such a beautiful way of thinking about the world. And even, I mean, my community with Baby Schema wasn't necessarily kind of talking to ecologists, but what I have loved has been kind of talking to people about what cuteness means to them. And it's been a real icebreaker to learn, you know, more about kind of what toys people might have had as children. We were talking about sea monkeys earlier, like, what were sea monkeys? You know, so just this kind of really interesting way of kind of bringing a community into writing, so that you're not solely on your own, it's not just your perspective.
Thank you both. And quick, someone ask another question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Isabel about Tamagotchis. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, kind of, you know, this wonderful poetic exploration you have of the Lapwing, and it all came because, you know, you saw it there in the film. Do you find you come full circle and just think, this bird's wonderful, you know, in itself, having explored it in all these different poetic ways, do you sort of recapture that initial moment?
So, sorry, I've got to tortuously repeat what you've said so eloquently in a less eloquent way for the live stream. But have you found that researching the lapwing that you kind of come full circle back to the idea of the initial just kind of apprehension of the bird, and maybe that applies to other research subjects as well?
Thank you. In a way, that goes to what you've just said, Izzy, about the fact that you kind of, even after you're finished, you have this love. And yes, I love them. I absolutely love them. And I get sent lapwing pictures every week by different friends. Tom, who's just left, he's a birder, another poet in the audience, and he sends me lapwing photos, and people send me lapwing memorabilia and anything that has, I've got lapwing mugs, I've got lapwing statues, I've got lapwing key rings, but I can't get enough of it. But I also get genuinely excited every time I see one. And what's lovely is that my kids now get very excited about lapwing. So that same daughter that I took in the carrier, we go to the bird reserve where we are, and she's like, my mummy writes about lapwings, and it's just a lovely thing. And so yeah, I still feel more excitement. The more I know about them, the more wonderful I think they are, actually. So yeah. Do you love squishamallows as much?
I have had to have a bit of a diet, I think, after writing about cuteness, because it is so sugary. And I don't know if I could necessarily go back to Disneyland Paris or any other Disney World. Like, I'm curious about how they do it in different countries. Like, that is a curious, you know, thing. So maybe, but not just yet, I think.
But what about your first book, like Limpets and the Significant Others? Do you find yourself still, like, do you want to write more about limpets and starfish and the kind of the shopping bag stomach? And like, it's lovely stuff, but lovely stuff. It's not like Alan Partridge. Lovely stuff. But do you find yourself going back to it still and wanting to return to it?
Yes, I do, actually. I think the poetry that I might be writing next is probably not going to be cute. I think it might kind of go back to the little creatures and maybe to insects, actually. But yeah, absolutely, limpets, barnacles. There are raincoats with limpet shells in them because I just carry them around all the time. So they're definitely not, I haven't finished with limpets yet.
Any other questions? In that case, I will, as a kind of closing question, cheesily riff on that idea of what you might return to, is it after the cuteness, and ask you both if there are things that have maybe emerged from existing projects that you want to write about and haven't written about yet. So it's not so much, I'm not asking you to reveal what you're working on now, but what are the directions that you feel drawn to, maybe, and why? A few different ideas, which I don't know if they're ever going to come to fruition, but I've been thinking a lot about ABCDeries, so these kind of forms where you would have, A is for acorn, B is for bee, C is for cat, and the ways in which they've been used over time as kind of learning devices for children. And I've been really interested in how they're always so nature-based.
as a way of getting children to learn their alphabets. And so part of me is kind of interested in exploring a kind of contemporary ABCdery, so something that might think about the creatures that we have on Earth, but also stand to lose from extinction. And I think that's kind of tenuously linked to cuteness, in the sense that I found ABCderies, these kind of teaching books for children, quite cute. There's a kind of rhythm to the poems and always a rhyme, kind of very simplistic because they need to be. So there's something there that I've kind of engaged with, and I'm not quite sure it's going, but that's where I'm at the moment. Hannah?
Similarly in that, I'm not really sure. I don't hold me to it. I'm not sure. I have been reading a lot about hyperobjects and stickiness. I've been trying to think about stickiness, good stickiness and bad stickiness, and the way that things and ideas stick to us, and that maybe we only experience these big ideas in very sticky little kind of local areas, and then how do we kind of make sense of the global and the local. And particularly I was thinking about like clothes and trying to kind of measure like my pants and where they began and where they end up, and all the kind of pieces of clothing on these beaches. And so stickiness is something that I'm trying to work out at the moment a little bit, but I'm not sure whether it'll stick or not, to be honest.
Thank you so much, both. This has been a really illuminating, fascinating discussion, and the readings were also sublime, so thank you. Thank you all for your attention, your questions, your engagement with the wonderful Manchester Poetry Library. If you've not been before, I'm sure lots of people have, but if you haven't, please stay and have a little look around. We've got Malika Booker's exhibition is still here at the moment. It's not quite in the spaces that it would normally be to accommodate this stage area, but there's plenty to see. And thank you to Martin and to Becky at the Poetry Library, and to everyone who's facilitated the tech and the filming. That's been wonderful. And but above all, thank you. Oh, before I say a big final thank you, I know, Hannah, you've got books, is that right? If anyone would like a copy. Do you have any books? Is it a few books? So please do get, first come, first served. If you would like a copy, then please find the authors afterwards, and we can carry on the conversation more informally. Big thank you, and big round of applause for the wonderful Hannah Copley and Isabel Galleymore. Thank you.